on in. Thanks for coming today. We have a tag team presentation today, and by Dan Cox and Lori Cramer. And what brought you here, of course, is it's sort of an update on near-field tsunami evacuation simulations, and it's something that's really of interest and importance to us. So I think I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of where they're at. But let me give a little background to Lori and Dan. Lori Cramer is an associate professor of sociology in the School of Public Policy at OSU. And over the last 25 years, her interest is in rural community research, but particularly right now, how communities are adapting to social and ecological change. And so that has a lot of relevance to what goes on in our coastal environments, which are rural. But currently, she's working very much on resilience to hazards, and particularly offshore earthquakes and subsequent tsunamis. So that connection here is very important. Dan is a professor in the School of Civil and Construction Engineering, and his specialty is in coastal engineering with recent work on community resilience to earthquakes and tsunamis. So they're a natural team, bringing their different areas of expertise together. He also served as the director of the Hinsdale Wave Research Lab for 8 years, and then, as I understand, took a sabbatical to Japan, which coincided with the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. So he's had some firsthand experience. And he's currently the director of the Cascadia Lifeline program. So what we're going to hear today is some of their observations and modeling of the approach that we undergo here in particular, but more broadly along the coast in preparing for these sorts of natural disasters. And with that, I'm not sure who's speaking first. I guess Dan is. All right.
Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you all for coming out today, for Marianne for inviting us and helping to organize this presentation. It's really an honor for me to be able to come to talk to you about the tsunamis. I'd like to acknowledge our third co-author. This is Professor Haizang Wang. He's an early career faculty at OSU. His specialty is in transportation engineering. And before he came onto the faculty at OSU, he did a lot of work on hurricane evacuation modeling and also things like overturned tanker cars and rail yards and how people would evacuate. So he kind of brought that expertise onto the project. I'd also like to acknowledge our students. I think they're in the back, if you guys can wave. So we've got Ali Reza Mostafizi. He's doing a lot of the agent-based modeling work that you'll see. Young-Soo Park, he's not here with us today, but he did all of the tsunami inundation work, starting all the way from the subduction zone and doing all the inundation. Alexandra Bolova, sorry, thank you. She's working with Lori in social science and is doing a lot of the interview work. And then Julia Waters is an undergraduate student working with us now and through the summer on also some of the social science aspects of it. So to get started, before I kind of launch right into the agent-based modeling, I think one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is this idea of the disaster itself. I think we talk a lot about tsunamis and earthquakes, which are just themselves the hazard. And we can be specialists in the hazard, but that doesn't necessarily make us a specialist in the disaster itself. To really understand disasters, you have to consider not just this natural system, but also, for example, the constructed environment, and then also the social systems and economic systems that come into play. And it's really the confluence of these three things. You can come at it from any point of view. In fact, we need people to come at it from lots of different points of view to come up in the middle ground where you can actually come up and solve the disaster. So try to keep the hazard from becoming a disaster. And that's what the research is about, and I think why we're interested in bringing so many different groups together. I'm going to try to play this video. This is just why minutes matter. So this is a camera transportation video just showing the tsunami. Tsunami's coming from the top. You get a sense of people trying to get out of harm's way in a hurry. So minutes matter, seconds matter in a lot of cases. And that's what's interesting. That's one thing that we have control over. When we hear a bell, fire alarm, it's really our choice. How soon do we want to take action? And the time from when we sense that there's a hazard to taking action, that time in between to make the decision, that's called the milling time. And that's something we have a lot of control over. And one way we try to minimize that milling time is by doing repeated drills. That's one of the most effective ways. We do them in schools all the time, fire drills. We do tsunami drills here at HMSC. And the whole goal is reduce the milling time, number one, and then also make sure we know which direction we're going. So that's kind of a key thing to think about. Working with Brian Fowler from Oregon Parks, we started looking at the evacuation in the South Beach area and trying to figure out, if we're out on the coast, what are our options? And if we look at the campground maps, so what we would have today in the South Beach area, is this the best option? Or are there other options that we could potentially come up with to get people out of harm's way in a hurry, if, for example, we're out on South Beach? So you can see the dots. These are just what we call agents. So these are just dots that are prescribed with a certain walking speed. They get a certain penalty for crossing over the sand. They all act by themselves, so they don't communicate in these simulations. And we just set them loose on different routes, and we see which routes are more effective than others, if some routes are more effective than others. And we inundate the South Beach with the worst case scenario. So the extra large event, we've recreated it, and that's the scenario that we're going to be showing you today, but it's not necessarily what's going to happen. So we're just coming up with scenarios for discussion. We're not really coming up with model predictions of this is what's going to happen. And I think it's where the discussions start that I think we can lead to a lot of useful results. So one of the things was, well, what if we go with the existing routes? What would happen if somebody were to leave from that part of South Beach along the trail? And I think, do we have the, yep. So we gave them 5 minutes of milling time. Now they're moving at about 5 feet per second, a little bit slower over the sand. They're going to split into two groups. One group is going to get in their car and try to drive out, and the other group is going to just keep on walking quickly out. After about 20 minutes, the tsunami hits our coast, and you can see the cars are moving about 4 times the speed of the people. There's no interaction between cars and people, but there is a model for queuing theory, so that if you come to a stop sign, you can't have, there's a certain rate at which cars can accelerate and decelerate. So that is the simulation, worst case scenario, and some credible numbers for walking speeds and driving speeds. I kind of can step through it again a little bit slower. So after 7 minutes, people are starting to move back onto the beach. After 13 minutes, everybody's well underway. After 20 minutes, the wave has hit the coast. After 26 minutes, we're starting to see people in their cars trying to evacuate in this scenario, or agents, let's just call them agents. After 30 minutes, this is where the bottleneck happens, and you can see there's one way out of the park, and that's kind of where you start to get a lot of queuing of the cars. And then the end result after 38 minutes is a mortality rate that's in excess of 50%. And this is considered a catastrophe. So even by the standards in Japan, when we looked at mortality rates all along the Tohoku coast, they range from about 2% to 20%. So 50% is too high. And we have to come up with some alternative ideas. And one of them, talking with the parks, was potentially rerouting people up to Safe Haven Hill. So that would be an option. Another one would be clearing a new trail that would lead directly to Highway 101. And then before you propose it, let's just try to simulate and see, do we change the number at all from this 50%? So we try it again. And again, this is just a scenario. It's not a prediction. So after 5 minutes, everybody's basically going to run everything the same, just put it 10 minutes in a direction. 20 minutes away the way that it goes. One little straggler. I know you're cheering that little dot.
again, clipping a little bit, just step by step. After this was where we had 27 minutes, around 30 minutes, where we had the point one of the simulation. But the scenario is might be night and day. From the greater than 50%, when cars are put to less than 2%, is a huge deal. I don't know a lot of reasons. I don't ever come with away with that here. That's like okay, we should reroute people in this one instance. Although you argue these are just dots. Not a guy, the dots were like hand mode. So I think one of the next steps for us was to say, well, even if we just did it with today, if we went out, we tried it. How well our results catch up with simulation. That's kind of what this is part of the talk. Before I get to that, I'll show you what I thought was interesting alternative, which is why we kind of have to consider these things together. The social part, the physical phase, and then also the knowledge about ways we operate games. We have to have a channel in this picture, and how might that influence the evacuation. So in this case, we're going to spend two directions. One back to the part, and the other is to go along edge. Again, we just stop being things, and we'll see what happens. You can guess which way you go. In this case, that's so the route in the park is longer. The route out along the edge is shorter. But you can see how much faster way to propagate to a channel because of the water depth channel. And then it's also very low-lying, and it can indicate fairly quickly. So in this simulation, again, stepping through, there's kind of very critical going on about 30 minutes, where the levees are essentially reached, and with not the good people who are moving slowly along that road. Versus in park, you're constantly gaining elevation, and it takes longer to pay attention to. So again, between these two scenarios, one had a evacuation without the other one was less than 2. So it's kind of a big difference. But our data never got lost, which walking through the park, and then home down to the park. Signage is, if you know that first time, maybe you're not going to take most things out. So I thought that's another question that we have had looking at this one. So how do we get real data? So it's not real evacuation data, but it's real evacuation data. That's what we're after. First time I was in a stationary area, I'm outside the HMSC drillers. Lori and I went out with our cell phones, trying to track them down on Google Maps, and then try to record time as we walk through how far we got. Just trying to get a general sort of model thing in the right ballpark. But then we realized there's a lot to keep track of. So then we are trying to develop our own model, which we ended up a lot more complicated than I would really. But there's a lot of apps out there that people use online, 5K, just their business. And so we decided to switch gears, train people how to use running apps, just beg them to give us data, and that's kind of what we've been doing. We started the first drill. We tried with our own app. It wasn't as successful as we wanted, but at least we got a better sense of layout and the routes that we wanted to do. And then with Ryan, we had a small pilot study back February with a number of our students, some of the our people, and then found out that was really nice, easy to use, and then we set up a much bigger drill just recently, May, also space station for so I think that went well. There was also a group around Toledo, high school teams for certain group. We were very fortunate to have them out. They were fantastic kids to work with, and then also a lot of data. So the project was something like this. Saturday morning, we all met at one of the years. Had an initial how this was what to do, and then we sent out groups to 4 different locations along the coast. And then we said that this earthquake's going to happen 10:45, and sent them to said, okay, try to take the hill however we want. And then we got up to take the hill, and then we did survey work. We talked a lot about survey work, and then came back to here and had a debrief. And we talked about the experience. We also showed some of the visualization, the Jeffrey drill, show the main drill, and then we also talked about kind of modeling, kind of science, modeling, especially when we did the students really. So we're going to try this. How this goes. This is just a visualization of people going through the park. We're going to see if I can just flip it over to the other screen. Make it big. This is the hard part driving. Then make it big. Hopefully people see it on that. I'm going to press play. But we're going to see things a little too quickly. Yeah, back to a little bit slower. And I think I can flip it around a little bit. So hopefully you can get a sense of what we're at here. Like a little bit slower. I can maybe speed up time a little bit. Usually we got about 8 pretty much I would believe. But you can get a sense of the perspective of how big our park is. And kind of the nature of the different speeds. You definitely have different variations of speed. Some of these are clusters of people, and some are just one and two people. You can see definitely the rates at which people move through the park. But try to speed up just a tiny bit. Yeah, I have a hard time seeing from this side, but we'll get it. Bear with me. That's a little not sure if it's going too fast, but we gotta kind of get a sense of different routes as well. People got different routes. There's one cluster of dots that we don't have on this one. That's the group coming out of the science center. You'll see. I got it in a minute. You also see there was one that didn't move at all. She was positioned on the ridge trail, and just to make sure everybody really got it. So she wanted to check out whether she can use this drop path. So that's why we had that. There's one other dot at DB. This is got and I would last one and two other guys do the last one is to get that out. But that was a kind of an animation of a visualization they have it work with. And then now I minimize it. That's hard. I can't get you to do this. Alright, I think I got it. Maybe. One second. Okay. So what we need to do is to get these dots. But now this is data from a real drill, and we can run it now with so one thing that is missing for cool simulation. You kind of see the topography and the parts, but you don't see where's the tsunami. So this one I'm trying to visualize it again, but in this case, let's add the tsunami cone and see whether or not we need the wave. You'll all notice we've got route out, and we're penalizing everybody by 5 minutes. So whatever their start time was, we added 5 minutes to account the milling and decision making. That's true. That's just what we did. And now you start to see the doctor moving. Maybe we pull away the background so you can see the wave coming in. There's one group heading up Hatfield. There's one group going along Jetty. That'll be an interesting comparison whether or not they made it. Nobody gets in the car, so we kind of excluded that one. And we also told everybody that you go to safe hill because we didn't want to track different groups. 20 minutes, the tsunami arrived. Started washing through the edge there. people from Untitled are now say they don't know. There's one guy up at the top. I think they're really but so we just made a red I'm not at a certain height. 30 minutes now I start to the wave initiate, and then after 40 minutes there's one flat and see what's happening. And then they make it up to the top. So one thing that's different in this scenario is we didn't use the extra large event. We just modeled it with a different way because there are lots of different possibilities. So I just want to show you for another really big one. It's also magnitude 9, but it's just at epicenter somewhere else along the coast. So we created it differently. If I remember correctly, I have one in which we'll go back down to extra large event. And then put both the artificial dots and the real data together. So the triangles now are the artificial dots and the artificial agents, and the yellow circles are the data generated by us. Yeah. Yeah, that was the February drill. Somebody else got lost. And that was I think where the park going, we don't have that again. Just want to make sure everybody is in the same spot. And I think one thing I'd like to do in the future is have a much bigger drill with multiple entry points, multiple X points. And then if we work enough, we can coordinate the action data. So we'd like to do a more realistic case. So running on the same scenario, you can say that the interesting thing that we're really excited about, but it's not perfect, partly because the routes are a little different, but our assumptions on walking speed, travel, all that kind of stuff, we're not that far off base. So that was a very satisfying result we got. For the model works is okay. I think we're recognizing how hard to make some of the survey work, maybe more signs, that kind of stuff, to make sure that people know that this is the best route to take, something like that, and practice some skills as well. Yeah, we took a very careful look at what are not just that's a great question. Also, what's their surface? Is it sand? Is it cave? Is it rock? Where people just have across the field. So we're definitely looking at modeling between sand and non-sand because we don't have enough information about it. But that's an important point on exactly trails. Because there's a wide variety. We all know another thing too related to this is we don't account for how we get tired or how we feel like there's no change. Right. So that people maintain they don't maintain their they don't get tired, they don't give up. Yeah. So those things are what happens for now. Until we get more information about how a steep hill might change with travel time, which we can start to do with data that we collect. So that's it on the simulation part. I'm going to turn it over to Lori for the survey.
So part of what we wanted to do was also figure out what people's perceptions are in the process. What do they think about it as they're making their milling time? And then also we wanted, because we're preliminary stages of testing this model, we want to talk about the model itself, use of the app, kinds of things. And so we had online, thanks to the parks, a link to an online survey. So when people register to camp, they can go online, they'll fill that out, as well as other people that were going to participate. And so we kind of broke down a bit about the visitor, who worked with the state park, who was the agent, state So we have some basic data just to get a sense of where we're coming from. It's not a random sample, it's not a perfect sample, but again, that wasn't our goal at this point, really kind of test the process to see if we have an efficient process going forward with additional research. And then we had survey we had come outlined as they thought cascade earthquake tsunami will happen in lifetime. The majority were extremely unlikely, except somewhat likely to happen in their lifetime. People are thinking about it and have that again, either likely or unlikely, kind of on 10 1 that is somewhat unlikely. And with this data, we had age data that we're looking in here, so certainly people who are like 60 years old are going to be thinking about the span of their lifetime versus somebody who's 19 years old and thinking about the span of their lifetime. But it was, again, just kind of preliminary way to get feedback on what people were thinking who were participating in this event. As I mentioned, we had different ways of trying to collect social science data. We had on-site registration. We also had people who were walk-ins, might have been camping, or might have brought the event, but didn't register for it. So try to gather some information on that. And then mention places along different areas of the beach to try to again simulate what's going on. And in the future, what we're hoping to do is work with parts of their data to get a better sense of where people might be distributed on any given day. So on this day, we want to get we pretty much had like our trailheads. Of course, if we're camping out on the beach and digging treasure, they're not going to necessarily be right on the trailhead. They're going to be out there doing their thing. So future scenarios are going to try to be more simulated, more regular day at the beach event. So again, not perfect. I have to distribute it in those common places. We only went to say Hill, not to community college as an alternative. We didn't want to deal with the traffic issues and those kinds of things. Again, testing the process. And then we had observers, the students outside the Hill, observing and talking to people about their experiences. How was it? What did they think? And also kind of noticing that people asking about people did take it serious. Assessing even though it wasn't a real event, they did take it seriously in terms of trying to walk as they could together. And then we also had that debrief at the yurt afterwards. After we had that debrief, and during that session, we had our students helping people upload their data so we can capture while they were there. Because sometimes people may leave, it's harder to get them to submit that. So they uploaded their data and helped them make sure that we were able to capture that. And then we did a follow-up and said, thank you for your data, but you're also going to do an online survey. So scientists want to capture every moment we can to get that data. And then that's, we received even more data on that, so that was helpful about the experience. So what did we find out? After participating in this, we feel prepared to be able to evacuate to a safe zone. Most people said yes or probably yes. One of the comments that we had from our observers, one of the students actually said, that is awesome. The students were so it made us feel good about it because they were getting a lot out of it, so we feeding on their energy. During the activity, I was thinking that if this was a real tsunami, would I evacuate successfully? This is the most meaningful thing that I have done. My preparedness for tsunami has increased. So they really feel, at age, we feel like it's made a difference. We have to be thinking about things in a way maybe I hadn't before. Again, walking back, doing those drills is great. Having that familiarity is going to be really important when the event happens. But then also having walked it to better ability, kind of empowers people as well. So that increases their likelihood to want to see condition behavior and information. Again, was it useful for the following outcomes? Learning the evacuation routes, that's red line. Yes, learning how long it takes to reach a safe zone. Yes. Improving my ability to evacuate somewhat. Learning about cascade earthquake and tsunami, not so much. But I don't feel bad about that since that wasn't our goal. Our goal was to educate them about the geology of the event, but more about the route and the speed it takes. So we had that in there anyway. And they're learning what I need to do to improve my ability to evacuate safely, also was relatively high. course, signage. When we were doing both the debrief and both events that had signage was an issue. And it's one of those fine lines, if you have too many signs that deter people coming if they sign, or how much is enough to get them to think about where I need to go. So the evacuation had clear signage. It was really mixed. People from Hatfield, they generally said yes, it was a very well marked from Hatfield. The negative response was also people right in the park. Some of them commented that they don't know for information trail signs, so people don't know where to go to reach safety. They have a general sense that yes, I'm supposed to go uphill, but there's a particular way to go. That's not easily known. Definitely the signage may be a major issue. It's easy to go from the beach to campground. Once we're inside your campground, where to go. You couldn't see Safety Hill or Eagle Bridge. So it's pretty hard to know which direction was the best. When you're in it, you can't see it. And if there aren't enough signs, how do you know where to go? Confidence markers pointing towards Safe Haven Hill. Confidence markers were those ideas that we have from here to Safe Haven Hill, that you're X minutes away. Keep going, you're nearly there. Having those kinds of confidence markers brought up. There were no signs in the jetty. There was an information sign telling you that we're in an inundation zone. Hey, how can they say that they knew where to go from there? So fine difference on that one. But of course, we were making notes of the people as well. But again, it's provided that information. Because as we saw in that simulation, a lot of people go to the jetty, they enter that way, but that might not be the best way to exit. And so how do we make that and inform people to make it more clear about that the nearest exit may be behind you rather than in front of you. About the app, again, was it easy to use? Most people thought it was, and then started stopping saving. You need to practice with it. So we feel pretty good overall about the use of this as a tool to help us gather data. The behavior of others during the drill affects evacuation behavior. This is one that is really important as a social scientist because we want to know what goes into that decision making. And are you going to be affected by the people around you? And it's really important working with the state parks that those people are in uniform are going to be looked to as leaders and as knowledgeable about what's going on. So we wanted to make sure we did have park people just take as observers and the real themselves. And they're like, oh, wow. And then also people are going to follow you and turn to you for information, kind of need to be aware of what's going on. And in general, people who are wearing anything that looks like a uniform. If you're wearing a shirt that looks like a uniform, it might turn all of you. There's a lot of research about different dynamics of different behavior. And it's like, oh, that person was really fast. They must know where they're going. But they may or they may not. How does that? Did people follow that pattern, even in this short event? And some people said that others helped find a way. Trusting their instincts on which direction to go. Some of them trusted it because they had to go uphill. They also saw it along the way. And then running the TV third group. One of them was saying that we were in a small group. One of the together they called it first second earthquake. One member suggested we go to the jetty because that was the nearest place to go. And then they all started to go that way. And another one said, wait a minute, that wave comes, we're going to get hit. Maybe we should go a different way. And they're all, yeah, maybe we should. So that's the point of it a different way. So having somebody who was kind of rational in the moment and not taking the shortest route is going to be really important to try to get people safely in a timely manner. So that really helps. So even if some people don't know where to go, having enough is going to be helpful. One of the last things I said, I have a group of people ahead, and that influenced a lot of them. Turns out they were bouncing, so that was a bad choice. In this event, we didn't partner with Untitled. We're hoping to set another one of our trade members to partner with them as a group and to involve them as well and their needs are going forward. In the future, how likely that you'll do any employees participate in evacuation drills that run line is common, and yes, people will continue to do that. Of course, I didn't ask, is that mandatory or not where you work? That might be fact, I'm not sure. We're prepared to go ahead, make a disaster and not change my behavior. And those that do not change my behavior, that's the line on the bottom. But that doesn't surprise me because some people who signed up for this already do these things. So why would you change your behavior already doing the preparedness? We need to attempt to hand that out a little bit between those that haven't done anything before to now will do something in the future. Do you think participating in this event will affect our preparation for visiting other places along the Oregon coast? And then George said either yes, probably yes, or definitely yes. And I'm really excited about this one because it means we're thinking about not only for that day event, but so yeah, I'm going to be camping up and down the coast. What else do I need to think about? If I'm visiting up and down the coast, I'll probably pay attention when I'm there as well. So get people to think beyond this event. It's a good thing. So then that figure, I got some of those comments, additional themes that came out. We'll learn, the first one again was on signage. Some of them need more, perhaps some arrows. And then the Southeast State Park says, yes, this was good feedback, and we're going to work with that. We were impressed with how well the groups work together. So not just the kids, but those in the groups as well. They talk about which way should we go, those kinds of things. There's also a bit about knowledge. These are comments that came from the audience. They acknowledge that it's important that in the moment of judgment calls, that things are happening faster than they thought, and they really need to be thinking on their feet, be prepared to think on their feet. This came from one of the team kids as well. So wow, this is really, really important for what we're doing in our training. We also see that came out how realistic was this event. For the most part, people took it seriously. Some water that ran, but OSU researchers, as Dan was mentioning, this is great information for us. Because as in our models, we have some pause for elevation, but we really don't want to know. Are people going to be running real fast, which can't sprint the whole way, so then do you stop, and how long do you stop? Do you sprint again, or do you walk again? So it helps us develop those models to understand a little bit more about people's stop and go pattern, how quickly they run or sprint or not. So that was great feedback for us. People are tired. The other thing is for really better more maps. We ended up getting maps. And in reality, when you're visiting the coast, when you're visiting these places, some may or may not look online these individualizations or not, but they won't have maps with them and say, okay, how do you get here? But I know that they say Dado Hill here. So they acknowledge that they felt a little more informed and might have if this had been a real event or had been this visitor would have been there before. And thoughts for the future, they gave us ideas, some kind of unknown, but the fact that it came from them and it was a related event. They maybe put down, say, fallen trees or some wires down so that our choice isn't available. Do they have a plan B? Recruit participants less able population of just senior centers. This was a self-selected group. So especially if people have paleo, they sprint right up there. Not everybody had paleo. Again, not everybody might have been able to sprint. And so trying to get a realistic idea who are the campers, who are the visitors. We're going to be working with staff on visitor data, their visitors are not only location, but kind of more on the demographics. So that we can make a little more real. We were trying to work with some of the local senior centers and community members as we get more confident more about what we're doing, broadening it out to those other groups so that we can refine what's going on. And one that just maybe either an evening event or have people use blinders. Maybe after they have cataract surgery and if the dark glasses to simulate the evening, maybe night evacuation. How does that affect people's times and abilities? Because you can't assume that the event is going to happen a little bit today and everybody's energized and ready to go. There's going to be different ways that we can do it. So how can we and then work on that to improve what we're up to? And Dan could talk a little bit more about some other things that we've got going on.
So some of the next steps. One of the other things that we're pretty excited about is taking the visualization data, the simulation data, and creating a visitor here. About our working on this one, and the idea is these are based on iPad side, and you come up and interact with it. You can make choices, I like photos around, or you can play certain games like role play games, that kind of stuff, and kind of choose and see what outcome would get. And I think what we're excited about is not making the exhibit per se, but doing the research on it and seeing what choices are people making, and how that compare with the assumptions that we're putting in the model. So using the cyber system, video and audio recording, we kind of start to see what choices people are making, and what they're talking about. They take it seriously, realistic, is it and ultimately does it change? The hardest one, but doesn't change anything. See additional information. So the idea is, in summer, sometimes we put a poster at the back with tsunami, geology, kind of stuff. They actually come and look at it, or they play again. So that's something we're interested in doing. This evacuation scenario. Again, it's helping us as well to ground truth our models and see the assumptions that we put in the models realistic. So that's something that we're going to demo this summer. Definitely welcome any feedback on it, what people think. This scenario is just for ourselves. We would like to do more drills in this calendar year. So that's kind of what we've done already. This summer we have a RU program called Undergraduate Research Fellowship Program. We have about 15 civil engineering students in it. We take a trip out to the coast to look at water treatment plants and other things. But we also run an evacuation drill. We like part of how to RU if that's possible. And again, for some of the trials on the experiential drill, and I think that's getting more to the kind of question you had about how realistic is it? Can we have like a hard pathway to tension strain on tension? I'd like to do more drills. We'd like to work more with certain groups. We think that's a really surprising of working with parks, and they're getting bus money and the money for the substitute teachers. That'll happen. But we've done work with teachers maybe in the fall, or depending on when their jobs are getting better. We've talked with parks also. Lincoln County School District, Land Development Conservation Oregon Land LCD, thank you. Some of the other groups don't know, they have their people waiting for a program. So this is trying to work with. It's not an entire group of just representatives from the state agencies coming in and seeing what we're up to. So that's more drills. The data is really extremely valuable for us. The idea of a K-10 knowledge section, we'll probably already something like that here in Newport. If it already exists, we'd like to be a part of it. If it's not an actual thing that we would like to help organize this around the topics of tsunami evacuation and I know Kate's already done a lot of great work on that. Some of the future improvements, some of the work that we're doing on evacuation models, a lot of work that the idea of unplanned disruptions is the idea that bridges get taken out because of the earthquake, and that evacuation route is no longer available. So these are things that we can program into the model if we have this more like what under the engineering side of it. This magnitude of the earthquake is the type of group we have. This is like it's passable by foot, but not car, by bicycle, but not foot, like all that kind of stuff. Down power lines, that's all part of the unplanned disruption. The big one for us is communication among evacuees. It's a known fact that we're influenced by others. And the agent-based modeling is extremely powerful because you can put that in. So that's why people understand agent-based modeling is not something that they use for agent-based modeling. The problem is we need more information about how people actually behaved in the real tsunamis, either in Japan, Chile. New Zealand was a recent one, trying to collect some of that data so we could put the real rules in. Working with disabilities, this is a very important part of it. we haven't done anything at this point, but we'd like to do it over the course of the next years. How do you create a all hazards, all people model? And then the population variations, just getting to tsunami risk, we're looking at what are the range of options, of possibilities of the population, what are the range of different types of tsunamis we have, and bring that in and mix to get more what is the risk, not what is the worst case, what's the worst that happen, what's the worst risk. That's part of the research that I'm trying to do. So it'll take a little longer. And I'm glad we have a lot of time for questions, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Okay.
And repeat the question again.
Sorry. So I was out here before I showed a simulation of seaside, and my question was what parameters have changed. Not much in terms of how the people are moving. So the walking speeds are the same. It's about 5 feet per second, which is about how fast we would cross the street. Vehicle speed in both models, actually. We just turned it off in this case because we didn't want to simulate. We didn't want to run a drill with people getting in their cars. I think that was just a choice we made. But we can easily do it. I don't think there's really the online part is the same thing, just because you highlighted it. I'll use actually the guy who's done both. Come back to that. Go ahead.
I'm curious what the current method of communication to people on the campus. What's current? Something that would be cell phones.
Well, the alert itself.
Okay, so I think the question is about how would the message be communicated to people on the beach that tsunami is coming. Right? I think the main thing is to communicate through education that if you get extreme ground shaking, there'll be a tsunami, have to evacuate. That's the main thing. I think there's also a lot of research that's saying that a lot of people need two independent pieces of information to make a decision. So if you hear a fire alarm, now you see the smoke, and then they make a decision to evacuate. So I think it's all right. But I don't know of any plan right now for order first 911 calls.
Can you come a little bit closer?
So I think the biggest key piece that we're missing here when you're talking about tsunamis,
You just said the word tsunami. You didn't say distant and you didn't say local. We educate the public there are two different types of tsunamis. They absolutely have to understand there are two different tsunamis. If you have a distant tsunami, your reaction time and your education is going to be different. It is not a life safety critical race for your life. A local event is. So the first step for all of our education is everyone needs to know there's two different types of tsunamis. If you only educate them to one, then when it comes to that decision point, and it's a distant tsunami, and you have an elderly person that freaks out and runs to her car and makes an unsafe decision when she had 12 hours to evacuate safely. So the first key is making sure that your audience knows there are two different types of events, and that irritating because that almost everywhere they still group them together as the same event. They're not the same event. So first thing, two different. I'm on my fully pulpit, but that's my job. So the other part is for a local event, you're making the assumption that communications will work. You're wrong. There is no assumption on the public safety planners and responders that we will be able to communicate to through public radio, your emergency alert system, any type of mass notification system, your shaking of the ground, no matter how small it is the only indication that you should use to make your decision to go to high ground. Granted, tiny little small things, people are going to second guess that. But those that second guess it, don't move to high ground, that's their probability of their own survival. You have to move forward immediately if you feel the ground shaking, if you suspect that you are in an inundation area. Many people have no clue, just like I said. I go to a KOA campground in Clackamas County. My kids totally understand. We get up in the middle of the night, in the dark, out of our little camper thing. We have no clue which way the ocean is. Because you are sitting in a bowl. You have no idea. So those people have to accept the risk that they put themselves in. But it's our responsibility as planners to make them aware of that risk. You don't care. You have to educate yourself. Ground shaking, you need to move to high ground. It's your responsibility to know what high ground is. Nobody is going to serve that information to you when you need it. But a distant tsunami is just the reverse. You have plenty of time to safely evacuate out of the area, and most of the technology should work at the very, very beginning until everyone does what? Now I'm on my cell phone. Mom, there's a tsunami. And then our local cell service will start to wane. So we have one shot to get that information out there.
It's good. It's an important message. I think that the difference between local and distant tsunamis is important.
Widely educated.
It's true. And I would be happy to come back to tsunamis. Yeah, definitely the difference between local and distant is essential. The idea that there's mass communication or reverse timelines, that's also likely not to be there. But I think the other message of it there is that often needs a second sign is still true. And so that if we don't evacuate, sometimes we're giving the wrong sign to other people that you don't need to know. And so people are looking around for these other signs, and when we start to see evacuate, and that helps to make other people evacuate. They may not agree, but people definitely tend to look for another sign. My point is I'm be watching Ryan doing something, so that can be a sign that they're seeing what the other person's doing. So it is just a comment. Or, that might be over.
Set of things.
Yep.
Moving forward, these little dots talking to one another. And there's things that come out with that. One modeling aspect of it, and we see how difficult that is. The other is how we get that information. I get to tell new people in EPA just what she said. Ground shakes, nobody thinks like anything different. Get diagram. Right? The other thing I have to say, and this is a difficult message to say, and a difficult message for people to hear. You're on your own, and the people who are injured are on their own. So if you help them, there is a good chance that the time you may need to put your life in jeopardy. And that's a personal decision. And coming from a governmental agency where you have to, all other situations, we take stock of who's in the building. We have a roster for fire drills and such. We also tell people, you're going to be there. The range chief is not going to be there with a clipboard seeing you've got to get yourself out of the building. He's going to be on his way to say, hey, help. Right? And so I'll be interested to come back in a year and see how you dealt with modeling that.
Yeah,
because I actually have to talk to people about it.
Yeah. So the examples that I saw, let's say the first time I saw the agent-based modeling were researchers in Japan, and they were very interested in every person for themselves or the reality of groups coalescing and then going to do something. And so that's a kind of active you could say, question, and especially relevant for parks because we often come with a group to the park. And it's just counter to a lot of people's instinct to just go on your own, although that's the message that is being told, especially in Japan. You just have to go and save yourself. So that, but it's an interesting aspect of this work that we're trying to do. So I definitely appreciate your comments. Just in the interest of time, maybe we'll get a couple more questions, and then I'll be happy to stick around. I think just to respect everybody's time, I think we'll stop at 4:30, but I'll be happy to stay around for a few more minutes after, if that's okay. So let's do one or two more questions.
We have scheduled an evacuation here in June, which I did see on your list. Are you going to be collecting data?
We would love to collect data, and that's part of why we're here, is to figure out who's doing what when. Yeah. And we would love to have people voluntarily track themselves with Strava. If they want to see how they do in relation to the wave, that's kind of what we're about. We would love to work with people doing it. Even, we envision too, like after a little while, there's just a website, you can do it on a Saturday by yourself and then visualize it. I forget what the name of the software was. Dorama. So there are lots of software now that people can just visualize their own data. So ultimately, we'd like to just make it not something that we have to organize, but people can kind of just do it on their own and get a sense of, okay, I did it. You know, it's a doable thing. So we would love to be a part of it.
The trail was, I'm sorry, just sent it to you just now. I sent
Okay.
it to the community list yesterday. It's June 16th at 2 p.m. and it will be from Kentfield to the Community College Hill.
So for those online, again, it was June 16th.
June 16th.
2 p.m.
What time, 2?
2.
At 2 p.m. from HMSC to Community College. Okay, very good.
There was one or two more hands up. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
So I think the idea of the simulation in the visitor center is a great idea. My question is, are you gonna make other simulations for other parts of the coast, or just focusing on this area?
The plan is just to focus in on this area, and ultimately what we want to do is kind of learn kind of the science behind it, rather than providing exhibit material coast-wide. But let's say, for example, if Dogami or another agency were interested in doing that, or parks, we would work with them to do it. But our goal is really to study the science behind it initially, and just to focus on this area. Although we do also have a test bed in Seaside, but the main focus on Seaside is a little bit more on the civil infrastructure because of all the bridges and roads, and it's just a different test bed. So we're kind of focused on South Beach and Seaside for 2 different reasons. But we're hoping that what we're learning is relevant for tsunami planning coast-wide, and with this KTAN to be able to disseminate it coast-wide. Last one, and then we'll.
Were there any other aspects of the experience that happened in Japan that you guys didn't touch upon that might be relatable to our coast and either the impact and aftermath?
Instead of going to the event, let me talk a little bit more about the planning, because that's kind of what the topic is today. There's a research group at Kyoto University. They're also doing a lot of interesting work with GPS tracking, video, and agent-based modeling for evacuations of coastal communities. And one of the interesting things they're working on is the most vulnerable populations there are elderly, and they're working with very young, kind of middle school kids, putting them together to work on the evacuation plans as a group. And they're also studying the dynamics of across generations, how it's more than just about tsunami evacuations, kind of how their communities put together with the different people. So I think that would be an interesting thing to explore, connecting Team CERT with other groups doing the evacuation. That's kind of something that we want to do. The other part about how people evacuation, all that kind of stuff, we're definitely interested in it. It's a little bit harder to get the data, but we're reading what we can and learning what we can about it. But nothing jumps out at me. But how they're doing their simulation drills kind of jumped out as, oh, that's kind of interesting. Mixing the two different groups. I'm going to stop here. Again, we're going to stay around for another few minutes. But again, I'd like to especially thank Brian for all his help helping put this together at the park, for Marianne for organizing the seminar, and all for you for listening. So thank you.